once upon a time. The night breathed through the apartment like a dark animal. The ticking of a clock, the groan of a floorboard as he slipped out of his room. All was drowned by its silence. But Jacob loved the night. He felt it on his skin like a promise, like a cloak woven from freedom and danger. Outside, the stars were paled by the glaring lights of the city, and the large apartment was stale with his mother's sorrow. She did not wake as Jacob stole into her room, even when he carefully opened the drawer of her nightstand. The key lay right next to the pills that let her sleep. Its cool metal nestled in his hand as he stepped back out into the dark corridor. There was still a light burning in his brother's room. Will was afraid of the dark, and Jacob made sure he was fast asleep before unlocking the door to their father's study. Their mother had not entered there since his disappearance, but for Jacob, this was not the first time he had snuck into the empty room to search for the answers she did not want to give. It still looked as if John Reckless had last sat in his desk chair less than an hour ago, instead of more than a year. The sweater he had worn so often hung over the chair, and a used tea bag was desiccating on a plate next to his calendar, which still showed the weeks of a past year. Come back. Jacob wrote it with his finger on the fogged-up window, on the dusty desk, and on the glass panels of the cabinet that still held the old pistols his father had collected. But the room remained silent and empty. He was 12 and had no father. He kicked at the drawers he had searched in vain for so many nights, yanked the books and magazines from the shelves, tore down the model airplanes that hung above the desk, ashamed at how proud he had once been when his father had allowed him to paint one with red varnish. The sheet of paper slipped out of a book on airplane propulsion. Jacob only picked it up because he thought he recognized his father's handwriting on it, though he quickly realized his error. Symbols and equations, a sketch of a peacock, a sun, 2 moons. None of it made any sense, except for the one sentence he spotted on the reverse side. The mirror will open only for he who cannot see himself. Jacob turned around, and his glance was met by his own reflection. The mirror. He still remembered very well the day his father had mounted it on the wall. It hung between the shelves like a shimmering eye, a glassy abyss that cast back a warped reflection of everything John Reckless had left behind. His desk, the old pistols, his books, and his elder son. The glass was so uneven one could barely recognize one's own reflection, and it was darker than other mirrors. But the rose tendrils winding across the silver frame looked so real, they seemed ready to wilt at any moment. The mirror will open only for he who cannot see himself. Jacob closed his eyes. He turned his back to the mirror, felt behind the frame for some kind of lock or latch. Nothing. Only his reflection was looking him straight in the eye. It took quite a while before he understood. His hand was barely large enough to cover the distorted reflection of his face, but the cool glass clung to his fingers as if it had been waiting for them, and suddenly the room he saw in the mirror was no longer his father's study. Jacob turned around. Moonlight fell through 2 narrow windows onto grey walls, and his naked feet stood on wooden floorboards covered with acorn shells and gnawed bones of birds. The room was bigger than his father's study, and above him cobwebs hung like veils from the rafters of a roof. Where was he? He stepped toward one of the windows, the moonlight painting patterns on his skin. The bloody feathers of a bird stuck to the rough ledge, and far below he saw scorched walls and black hills, with a few lost lights glimmering in the distance. He was in a tower. Gone were the sea of houses, the bright streets. Everything he knew was gone. and high among the stars were two moons, the smaller one as red as a rusty coin. Jacob looked back at the mirror, and in it he saw the fear on his face.